Harris.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
Trump.
But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far.
And plenty of mic drops.
Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they
here.
threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
Trump versus Harris, the first debate. 90 minutes long and over 10 topics to discuss. I'm just going to cover the highlights.
We had the greatest economy. We got hit with a pandemic. And the pandemic was not since 1917, where 100 million people died, has there been anything like it. We did a phenomenal job with the pandemic.
So there were some good points at the end of the Trump presidency. Unemployment hit a 50-year low of 3.5%. And on top of that, there was job growth. There was a gain in the stock market. But that seems to be where it ends, because the negativity is part of the reason he was voted out. COVID-19 pandemic led to the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, with unemployment eventually spiking at 14.7% in April 2020, and GDP contracted by 3.5% for the year. The economy experienced sharp declines in consumer spending, business closures, and massive layoffs in retail, hospitality, and travel. The deficit ballooned under Trump's presidency, exceeding 27 trillion. And on top of that, household debt raised itself up to 13 trillion, exacerbating the wealth gap. And of course, what does Trump do? And we'll hear throughout all of this, he blames migrants. But the other interesting thing that he didn't mention, and Harris did, because of his actions and because of the pandemic, housing wasn't being built. Harris has a plan, Trump doesn't.
Donald Trump has no plan for you. And when you look at his economic plan, it's all about tax breaks for the richest people. I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America.
Now, the evidence to support that is the inequality that's taking place. Billionaires, millionaires got richer, and low-wage regular workers didn't. And that's what we see in statistics.
Your proposal calls for tariffs, as you pointed out here, on foreign imports across the board. You recently said that you might double your plan, imposing tariffs up to 20% on goods coming into this country. As you know, many economists say that with tariffs at that level, costs are then passed on to the consumer. Vice President Harris has argued it'll mean higher prices on gas, food, clothing, medication, arguing it costs the typical family nearly $4,000 a year. Do you believe Americans can afford higher prices because of tariffs?
They're not going to have higher prices. What's going to have, and who's going to have higher prices, is China and all of the countries that have been ripping us off for years. I was the only president ever.
We'll come on to what he just said about tariffs in a second, but did you understand what he just said?
I was the only president ever.
Now again, what he said there was that if you put in tariffs, it doesn't go into the consumer. Well, who does it go on to? Are the businesses going to soak up the costs? Of course not. He's saying he's taking out of China, that's fine. It will raise revenue for the American government, but it's going to come at a cost to the consumer. And this is what we've seen in the economy.
Because I've never seen a worse period of time. People can't go out and buy cereal or bacon or eggs or anything else.
The average American can buy eggs and bacon and cereal. What the hell is he talking about?
The plan is, as you know, the vote is, they have abortion in the 9th month. They even have, and you can look at the governor of West Virginia, the previous governor of West Virginia, not the current governor, who's doing an excellent job, but the governor before, he said the baby will be born and we will decide what to do with the baby. In other words, we'll execute the baby. And that's why I did that, because that predominates, because they're radical. The Democrats are radical in that. And her vice presidential pick, which I think was a horrible pick, by the way, for our country, because he is really out of it. But her vice presidential pick says abortion in the 9th month is absolutely fine. He also says execution after birth. It's execution, no longer abortion, because the baby is born, is okay.
Babies killed after they're born. He's just a conspiracy theorist. Or he just watches and reads conspiracy news and believes it all to be true. And he does bring that up later.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response to President Trump.
Well, as I said, you're going to hear a bunch of lies, and that's not actually a surprising fact.
I think probably her boss, if you call him a boss, he spends all his time on the beach.
Pretty rich coming from a guy who has spent more time at the golf course than any living or past president. And by the way, we're still on the topic of abortion, and listen to this when he starts going on about student loans.
But look, her boss went out and said, we'll do it again. We'll do it a different way. And he went out, got rejected again by the Supreme Court. So all these students got taunted with this whole thing about this whole idea. And how unfair that would have been, part of the reason they lost, to the millions and millions of people that had to pay off their student loans. They didn't get it for free. But they were saying it's the same way that they talked about that they talk about abortion.
But if I could just get a yes or no, because your running mate, J.D. Vance, has said that you would veto if it did come to your desk.
Well, I didn't discuss it with J.D. In all fairness, J.D., and I don't mind if he has a certain view, but I think he was speaking for me, but I really didn't. Look.
Just all over the place. And Kamala Harris definitely tried to wind him up.
And I'm going to actually do something really unusual, and I'm going to invite you to attend one of Donald Trump's rallies, because it's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom. And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you. You will not hear him talk about your needs, your dreams, and your desires. And I'll tell you, I believe you deserve a president who actually puts you first, and I pledge to you that I will.
Vice President Harris, thank you. President Trump, on that point, I want to get your response.
Well, I would like to respond.
Let me just ask, though, why did you try to kill that bill, and successfully so? That would have put thousands of additional agents and officers on the...
Now watch, because he never answers the question as to why he killed that bill.
She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics. That's because people want to take their country back. Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III, just to go into another subject. What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
Yes, you heard right. He continues with these wild conspiracy theories that have zero foundation in truth. The thing I find particularly weird about this is if the owners were aware that their dogs had been stolen, how would they know that those dogs or cats have been eaten unless they witnessed it happening? And then I have the question of, why would you sit there and watch your dog or cat be eaten?
As far as the rallies are concerned, as far as the reason they go is they like what I say. They want to bring our country back. They want to make America great again. It's a very simple phrase, make America great again. She's destroying this country, and if she becomes president, this country doesn't have a chance of success. Not only success, we'll end up being Venezuela on steroids.
I just want to clarify here. You bring up Springfield, Ohio, and ABC News did reach out to the city manager there. He told us there have been no credible reports of specific claims of pets being harmed, injured, or abused by individuals within the immigrant community.
Well, I've seen people on television.
Let me just say here, this is the
people on television say my dog was taken and used for food. So maybe he said that, and maybe that's a good thing to say for a city manager.
I'm not taking this from
but
television.
But the people
I'm
on
taking it from
television
the city
saying their
manager.
dog was eaten by the people that went there.
Again, the Springfield city manager says there's no evidence of that. Vice President Harris, I'll let you respond to the rest of what you've heard.
You talk about extreme. This is, I think, one of the reasons why in this election I actually have the endorsement of 200 Republicans who have formerly worked with President Bush, Mitt Romney, and John McCain, including the endorsement of former Vice President Dick Cheney and Congress member Liz Cheney. And if you want to really know the inside track on who the former president is, if he didn't make it clear already. Just ask people who have worked with him. His former chief of staff, a four-star general, has said he has contempt for the Constitution of the United States. His former national security advisor has said he is dangerous and unfit. His former Secretary of Defense has said the nation, the Republic, would never survive another Trump term. And when we listen to this kind of rhetoric, when the issues that affect the American people are not being addressed, I think the choice is clear in this election.
President Trump, I'll give you a quick minute to respond here.
Thank you, because when I hear that, see, I'm a different kind of a person. I fired most of those people. Not so graciously. They did bad things or a bad job. I fired them. They never fired one person. They didn't fire anybody having to do with Afghanistan and the Taliban and the 13 people who's were just killed, viciously and violently killed. And I got to know the parents and the family. They didn't fire. They should have fired all those generals, all those top people, because that was one of the most incompetently handled situations anybody has ever seen. So when somebody does a bad job, I fire them.
Just been asked about what he can do for the American people, and he starts ranting on about how he fires people that aren't very good at their job.
But just to finish, I got more votes than any Republican in history by far.
Two things. First of all, it's always going to be likely that you're going to get more votes than the previous generations because there are more people in the United States and the population continues to grow. But the other thing is, he somewhat shot himself in the foot. Because he's basically saying, even though I got more votes than any other Republican nominee, I still lost. I'm a loser.
Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof.
Just total nonsense. Europe, Africa, and other parts of the world are still suffering from high crime rates and increasingly high crime rates and homicide. But also, about 60 to 80% of the global population are under high criminality. I don't know where he's getting these facts and figures from, but again, it just seems to be completely made up.
Despite their fraudulent statements that they made, crime in this country is through the roof. And we have a new form of crime. It's called migrant crime. And it's happening at levels that nobody thought possible.
President Trump, as you know, the FBI says overall violent crime is actually coming down in this country. But Vice
Excuse me,
President
the
Harris,
FBI they were defrauding statements. They didn't include the worst cities. They didn't include the cities with the worst crime. It was a fraud, just like their number of 818,000 jobs that they said they created turned out to be a fraud.
President Trump, thank you. I'll let you respond, Vice President Harris.
Well, I think this is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault, and his next big court appearance is in November at his own criminal sentencing.
His conspiracies don't end there because he's going to have a dig at the shooter who was a Republican, and guess where he puts the blame?
She weaponized. I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me. They talk about democracy. I'm a threat to democracy. They're the threat to democracy with a fake Russia investigation that went nowhere.
That's not true. The actual report from Mueller showed that the Russians attempted to contact Donald Trump's team, but the people who were in the team were so stupid they didn't understand who it was that they were talking to. One of the biggest bunglings was from Michael Cohen. The wife of Dmitry Koklov reached out to Cohen and offered assistance. Koklov was the press secretary to the energy minister in Putin's government. Someone, as you can imagine, quite high up and obviously interconnected with Putin. However, Michael Cohen, being a complete moron, Googled this name and came up with this guy. There would have been plenty of collusion if Trump had actually hired good people around him.
And I want to talk about the peaceful transfer of power, which, of course, we all know is a cornerstone of our democracy, and the role of a president in a moment of crisis. Mr. President, on January 6th, you told your supporters to march to the Capitol. You said you would be right there with them. The country and the world saw what played out at the Capitol that day, the officers coming under attack. Aides in the West Wing say you watched it unfold on television off the Oval Office. You did send out tweets, but it was more than 2 hours before you sent out that video message telling your supporters to go home. Is there anything you regret about what you did on that day?
You just said a thing that isn't covered. Peacefully and patriotically, I said during my speech, not later on.
He also said the word slaughtered once, killed or killing 3 times, dead 5, destroyed 6, 7 strong, 12 weak, hell 13, and the word fight or fighting 20 times.
Peacefully and patriotically. And nobody on the other side was killed.
According to reports, 6 officers died as a result directly after the riots, and 147 police officers were injured. What is he talking about?
Ashley Babbitt was shot by an out-of-control police officer that should have never, ever shot her. It's a disgrace.
Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people. So let's be clear about that. And clearly he is having a very difficult time processing that.
I believe it was a Secret Service officer who pointed a gun, challenged her, she smashed through a window, and he was the last line of defense between that crowd and the senators. And she smashed the window regardless and charged her way through. That's why the gun was fired. For someone who talks about law and order, it's one thing when it's about him or people that he considers that he needs to protect. But when it comes down to people voting against him or people he considers to be traitors, it's fair game for them to be attacked.
When are the people that burned down Minneapolis going to be prosecuted? Or in Seattle? They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle.
Yes, sir.
I had nothing to do with that other than they asked me to make a speech. I showed up for a speech. I said, I think it's going to be big. I went to Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington, D.C., and the mayor put it back in writing, as you know. I said, you know, this is going to be a very big rally or whatever you want to call it. And again, it wasn't done by me. It was done by others. I said, I'd like to give you 10,000 National Guard or soldiers. They rejected me. Nancy Pelosi rejected me. It was just 2 weeks ago. Her daughter has a tape of her saying she is fully responsible for what happened. They want to get rid of that tape. It would have never happened if Nancy Pelosi and the mayor of Washington did their jobs. I wasn't responsible for security. Nancy Pelosi was responsible. She didn't do her job.
The question was about you as president, not about former Speaker Pelosi, but I do want Vice President Harris to respond here.
I was at the Capitol on January 6th. I was the vice president-elect. I was also an acting senator. I was there. And on that day, the President of the United States incited a violent mob to attack our nation's capital, to desecrate our nation's capital. On that day, 140 law enforcement officers were injured, and some died. And understand, the former president has been indicted and impeached for exactly that reason. But this is not an isolated situation. Let's remember Charlottesville, where there was a mob of people carrying tiki torches, spewing anti-Semitic hate. And what did the president then at the time say? There were fine people on each side. Let's remember that when it came to the Proud Boys, a militia, the president said, the former president said, stand back and stand by.
He shakes his head, but here is Donald Trump saying those exact words.
Do it, sir.
Say it. Do it. Say it. Do you want to call him? What do you want to call him? Give me a name. Give me a
White
name.
supremacists and
Who would
right
you like me to condemn?
White supremacists and right
Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. Stand back and stand by.
Hail Trump! Hail our people! Hail victory!
Stand back and stand by.
The phrase he used has already been converted into a logo.
Stand back and stand by.
Does the White House, the president, want to clarify or explain what he meant by that? Because they're celebrating it, the group.
I don't think that there's anything to clarify.
And it continued because they asked him about him and whether or not he accepted the result of the 2020 election.
Mr. President, for 3.5 years after you lost the 2020 election, you repeatedly falsely claimed that you won, many times saying you won in a landslide. In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I
you
said
did
that
say that.
sarcastically.
But
You know
those-
that. It we said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically.
I did watch all of these pieces of video. I didn't detect the sarcasm. Lost by a whisker. We didn't quite make it. And we should just point out here as clarification, and you know this, you and your allies, 60 cases in front of many judges, many of them Republican.
No judge looked at it.
And said
they
there was
said
no
we didn't have
widespread
standing.
fraud.
That's the other thing.
The guy is an idiot. Standing means that the judge has looked at the evidence provided and said there's not enough for this case to go ahead. That's standing, and he doesn't understand it. And then he cites Viktor Orban, whose right-hand man I've had personal dealings with.
Let me just tell you about world leaders. Viktor Orban, one of the most respected men, they call him a strong man. He's a tough person, smart. Prime Minister of Hungary. They said, why is the whole world blowing up? 3 years ago it wasn't. Why is it blowing up? He said, because you need Trump back as president. They were afraid of him. China was afraid, and I don't like to use the word afraid, but I'm just quoting him. China was afraid of him. North Korea was afraid of him. Look at what's going on with North Korea, by the way. He said Russia was afraid of him. I ended the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and Biden put it back on day one, but he ended the XL pipeline.
In 2016, I spent about a month in Budapest and met one of Viktor Orban's right-hand men who was interviewing me for a job. He found out I had some sort of interest in history and politics and complained to me about the fact that London had a choice between Khan, a Muslim, and a Jew, Zach Goldsmith. I never took the job for obvious reasons, but it's funny how Trump brings that man and his entourage up as a great world leader when you hear them saying stuff like that in private.
It is well known that he said of Putin that he can do whatever the hell he wants and go into Ukraine. It is well known that he said when Russia went into Ukraine, it was brilliant. It is well known he exchanged love letters with Kim Jong-un. And it is absolutely well known that these dictators and autocrats are rooting for you to be president again because they're so clear they can manipulate you with flattery and favors. And that is why so many military leaders who you have worked with have told me you are a disgrace. That is why we understand that we have to have a president who is not consistently weak and wrong on
Vice
national
President
security,
Harris.
including the importance of upholding and respecting in highest regard our military.
Where is our president? We don't even know if he's a president.
And just to clarify
they
here,
threw him out of a campaign like a dog. We don't even know. Is he our president? But we have a president,
Mr. President,
that doesn't know he's alive.
your time is up. Just to clarify in the question, do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
All right.
Negotiate a deal, because we have to stop all of these human lives from being destroyed.
I want to take this to Vice President Harris. I want to get your thoughts on support for Ukraine in this moment, but also as Commander-in-Chief, if elected, how would you deal with Vladimir Putin, and would it be any different from what we're seeing from President Biden?
Well, first of all, it's important to remind the former president you're not running against Joe Biden, you're running against me. I believe the reason that Donald Trump says that this war would be over within 24 hours is because he would just give it up.
I'm pretty sure that's what the rest of the world are thinking.
Putin would be sitting in Kyiv with his eyes on the rest of Europe, starting with Poland. And why don't you tell the 800,000 Polish Americans right here in Pennsylvania how quickly you would give up for the sake of favor and what you think is a friendship with what is known to be a dictator who would eat you for lunch. As a leader upholding international rules and norms, as a leader who shows strength, understanding that the alliances we have around the world are dependent on our ability to look out for our friends and not favor our enemies because you adore strongmen instead of caring about democracy. But let's understand how we got to where we are. Donald Trump, when he was president, negotiated one of the weakest deals you can imagine. He calls himself a deal maker. Even his national security advisor said it was a weak, terrible deal. And here's how it went down. He bypassed the Afghan government. He negotiated directly with a terrorist organization called the Taliban. The negotiation involved the Taliban getting 5,000 Taliban terrorists released. And get this, and the president at the time invited the Taliban to Camp David and especially by race. And let's remember how Donald Trump started. He was he owned land, he owned buildings, and he was investigated because he refused to rent property to black families. Let's remember, this is the same individual who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times calling for the execution of 5 young black and Latino boys who were innocent, the Central Park 5. Took out a full-page ad calling for their execution. This is the same individual who spread birther lies about the first black president of the United States. And I think the American people want better than that, want better than this, want someone who understands, as I do, I travel our country. We see in each other a friend. We see in each other a neighbor. We don't want a leader who is constantly trying to have Americans point their fingers at each other.
He also had his thoughts on Medicare, and it sank like a ton of bricks.
But until then, I'd run it as good as it can be run.
So just a yes or no, you still do not have a plan?
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if...
The whole point is that you're trying to sell people a product that you're going to give them if you get to power. You can't do that if you don't tell them what it is and just keep telling everyone you've got a concept. What is he talking about? Then there was climate change, and frankly none of them came out looking good. And it's probably because the oil and gas giants and other fossil fuel makers have a lot of control over what takes place in the US.
Well, the former president had said the climate change is a hoax. And what we know is that it is very real. You ask anyone who lives in a state who has experienced these extreme weather occurrences, who now is either being denied home insurance or it's being jacked up. You ask anybody who has been the victim of what that means in terms of losing their home, having nowhere to go. We know that we can actually deal with this issue. The young people of America care deeply about this issue. And I am proud that as vice president over the last 4 years, we have invested $1 trillion in a clean energy economy, while we have also increased domestic gas production to historic levels.
So you're asked about climate change and you start bragging about how you're doing so well with production in fossil fuels. It's a really bad answer. It's not really going to enamor people to support her who are interested in trying to stop the effects of climate change. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think won and what do you think of my analysis? Once again, thank you to all of my Patreon YouTube supporters who keep this channel going and growing. If you'd like to become one of them, please click the link in the description. Once again, thanks for listening. Bye for now.